I arrived at Toronto Pearson International Airport's long-term parking area, feeling excited about surprising my son Derek for his birthday. I had flown in from Vancouver specifically for this occasion. As I walked through the rows of parked cars, something unusual caught my attention. There was a silver Honda Civic with fogged-up windows, and I could see movement inside. When I got closer, my heart sank. Inside the car was my son Derek, asleep in the back seat with his 5-year-old twin boys, Leo and Jasper, curled up next to him under a single blanket. It was March, and they were living in an airport parking lot. I knocked on the window and Derek's eyes opened suddenly. Through the glass, I saw an expression I had never witnessed on my son's face before. Pure shame. He opened the door slowly while the boys continued sleeping. His voice was hoarse when he asked what I was doing there. I couldn't keep my composure and demanded to know what was happening, where the house was, where Amanda was, and why he was living in his car with my grandsons. Derek looked away and said it was complicated. I told him there was nothing complicated about sleeping in a parking lot with 5-year-old children in March. The boys began waking up, and Leo rubbed his eyes, calling out to me. I suggested the boys come with me for breakfast while Derek and I talked privately. An hour later, the boys were eating pancakes at the airport Tim Hortons while Derek and I sat at another table. He looked exhausted and defeated. I asked him to tell me everything. He took a shaky breath and explained that Amanda had left him 3 months earlier, but it was worse than just a separation. She had taken everything, the house, the bank accounts, and all the business money. I asked how she could take the house when it was in both their names. Derek explained that Amanda had convinced him to sign papers putting the house solely in her name, claiming it was for tax purposes. He trusted her and signed the documents. Then one day he came home from work to find the locks changed and a restraining order against him. Her lawyer claimed Derek was mentally unstable and dangerous, saying he had been threatening her. I told him that was absurd because he had never been violent in his life. Derek agreed, but explained that she had what appeared to be evidence. Her lawyer presented text messages he supposedly sent and emails, along with witnesses who claimed they had seen him acting erratically. Her parents supported every accusation, painting him as an unstable and controlling husband, and the judge believed their version of events. I asked about the money, specifically the $150,000 I had invested in his startup. Derek's face crumbled as he told me it was gone. Amanda had been managing the business accounts, and the day before she left, she transferred everything to an investment account belonging to her father. She claimed it was a legitimate business loan they had discussed, and Derek had no proof otherwise because she handled all the paperwork. I asked about the boys. Derek explained that the custody hearing had been 2 weeks earlier, and he lost. He only got supervised visitation twice a week. The rest of the time, the boys stayed with Amanda and her parents. The court said he needed to prove stable housing and employment first, but he couldn't get stable housing without money, and Amanda had made sure he had nothing. He had been working but barely made enough for food and the parking spot. He showered at the gym, and the boys thought they were on an adventure. When I asked where the supervised visits took place, he said they were at her parents' house with her mother supervising. He described it as humiliating, with them watching every interaction and writing notes. He couldn't even hug his own sons without feeling judged. I told him this ended immediately. I instructed him to pack up the car because he and the boys were coming to stay at my hotel until we figured things out, and then we were going to fix this situation. Derek protested that I didn't understand, explaining that her family had money. Her father, Vincent, was a real estate developer with good lawyers, and Derek felt he couldn't fight them. I told him that maybe he couldn't fight them alone, but together we could. That night, after the boys fell asleep in the hotel room, I sat at the desk making calls. First, I called my lawyer in Vancouver, Raymond Chen, whom I had known for 30 years. Then I called an old friend, Detective Samantha Morrison with Toronto Police, who owed me a favor from years back when I helped her son get into university. I asked Raymond to recommend the best family lawyer in Ontario, explaining that money was not an issue. Raymond asked what was going on, and I told him everything. After a long pause, Raymond said this smelled like fraud. The business account transfers, the forged documents, and the coordinated testimony indicated this wasn't just a custody dispute, but organized theft. He said Derek needed someone who handled both family law and financial crimes. Raymond gave me the name Caroline Hart, one of the top lawyers in Toronto who specialized in high-conflict custody cases with financial abuse components. Her retainer was expensive, but I didn't care. The next morning I met with Caroline. She was in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She told me to share everything without leaving out any details I might think were insignificant. I recounted Derek's entire story while she took notes and asked pointed questions. Then she leaned back in her chair and explained what we were dealing with. Caroline said Derek's ex-wife and her family had executed what is called financial coercive control, combined with parental alienation. They had systematically stripped him of resources, credibility, and access to his children. The text messages, witnesses, and mental health accusations followed a playbook she had seen before. I asked if we could prove it. Caroline said it depended on whether we had any documentation from the business, such as bank statements or emails. I told her I had the wire transfer confirmations from when I invested the money and emails from Derek about the business plan. Though Amanda handled most of the business accounts, Caroline said that was a start and asked about Derek's mental health, since they were claiming he was unstable. I explained that Derek had been seeing a therapist the previous year, not because he was unstable, but because work was stressful, and he was trying to manage the pressure of the startup. Caroline said that was actually good, because therapy records showing he was proactively managing stress would prove the opposite of their claims. She said we needed those records and also needed to conduct a forensic accounting analysis of the business accounts. If money was transferred out improperly, they would find it. She also said we needed to depose the witnesses who claimed Derek was unstable because she guaranteed their stories wouldn't hold up under scrutiny. I asked how long this would take. Caroline said it would be months, maybe longer, because family court moves slowly. However, in the meantime, she could file an emergency motion to modify the custody arrangement. If we could show that the boys were in a stable environment with Derek and me, and that Amanda obtained custody through fraudulent means, we might be able to get temporary joint custody while the case proceeded. I told her to do it. Over the next 2 weeks, I became focused on a single mission. I rented a 3-bedroom apartment in Mississauga, furnished it completely, and enrolled Leo and Jasper in a nearby school. Derek got a job with a tech company through a former colleague who believed in him. I made it my job to build the case. I drove to Derek's old workplace and talked to his colleagues. Every single one of them was shocked by the accusations. Gabriel Rodriguez, his former business partner, said the idea of Derek being unstable was absurd, describing him as the calmest person in the room during crises. He said Amanda was the volatile one and recalled her screaming at Derek in the office once because he worked late. I asked if he would be willing to testify to that, and he said absolutely. I tracked down the therapist, Dr. Nina Patel. She couldn't share Derek's records without his consent, but Derek signed the release immediately. When Dr. Patel provided her notes, they painted a clear picture of a man dealing with normal work stress using healthy coping mechanisms, with zero signs of instability or aggression. Then I started investigating Amanda's family. Her father, Vincent Caldwell, was a real estate developer in Oakville. On the surface, everything looked legitimate, but my detective friend Samantha did some checking. She told me that Vincent Caldwell had been investigated twice by the Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Center of Canada, both times for suspicious large cash deposits. No charges were filed, but there were red flags. She also discovered that 3 years earlier, a business partner had sued him for fraud. The case was settled out of court with sealed records. I asked if we could use that information. Samantha said it depended on what my lawyer could dig up, but it established a pattern of behavior. Caroline hired a forensic accountant named Preston Wu. It took him 3 weeks, but he traced every dollar of Derek's business accounts. What he found was damning. The $150,000 I had invested had been transferred to an account belonging to Vincent Caldwell. labeled as a business loan. However, there was no loan agreement, no terms, no repayment schedule, and nothing in writing. It was just a transfer made the day before Amanda filed for the restraining order. More transfers followed over 14 months. Amanda had systematically moved money from the business account to personal accounts, and then to her father's accounts. The amount started small, $500 here and $1,000 there, then grew larger. By the end, she had transferred nearly $280,000. Preston said this wasn't a marital dispute but embezzlement. She had been draining the business while maintaining the appearance of normalcy, and her father was complicit. I asked if Derek could get the money back. Preston explained that if we could prove fraud, yes, but it would require criminal charges beyond just civil court. This was beyond family law. Caroline filed motions, starting with an emergency motion to modify custody. She presented evidence that Derek now had stable housing and employment, and that the boys had been living with him and me for a month, thriving in school, and seeing their pediatrician regularly. She presented Dr. Patel's records, which demolished the mental instability claims. She also presented testimony from Derek's colleagues, proving Amanda's accusations were false. Amanda's lawyer, a slick guy named Bradley Harding, fought back hard. He claimed Derek was only stable now because I was bankrolling everything, and that it wasn't sustainable. He argued that the boys needed their mother. But Caroline was relentless. She deposed Amanda's witnesses, and one by one, their stories fell apart. Amanda's friend Vanessa, who claimed she had seen Derek act erratically at a party, admitted under oath that she had only heard about it from Amanda and hadn't actually witnessed anything. Amanda's neighbor, who claimed Derek had shouted threats, admitted he had never actually heard the words, but had just seen Derek looking angry through a window. The supervised visits became our strongest evidence. I attended several with Derek. Amanda's mother, Diane Caldwell, sat in the corner with a notebook, writing constantly. What she didn't know was that Derek had started recording the audio of every visit on his phone, which was legal since it was in a shared space with consent posted on the wall. The recordings showed the boys were happy and well-adjusted, excited to see their father. They called him Dad unprompted, hugged him and told him about school. There was zero fear or hesitation. They were normal kids with their normal father. However, Diane's notes painted a completely different picture, claiming the father appeared agitated. The children seemed withdrawn, and the father's tone was aggressive. These were all lies, all documented lies that were contradicted by the audio recordings. Caroline submitted the recordings to the court with a motion to end supervised visitation, arguing that the supervision was being weaponized to create false evidence. Then came the forensic accounting report. Preston had traced every fraudulent transfer. Caroline didn't just submit it to family court, she also submitted it to the Police Fraud Division and to the Canada Revenue Agency. Vincent Caldwell was now under investigation for tax evasion and fraud, and Amanda was facing potential criminal charges for embezzlement. The custody hearing was scheduled for July, 6 months after I had found my son in that parking lot. The courtroom was tense. Amanda sat with her parents and her lawyer, looking confident. Derek sat with me and Caroline, looking nervous but determined. The judge was Justice Margaret Holloway, a woman in her 60s with a reputation for being thorough and fair. Caroline presented our case methodically. The forensic accounting, the false accusations, the contradictory witness testimony, the audio recordings proving the supervised visits were manipulated, Dr. Patel's records, and Derek's stable employment and housing. Bradley Harding tried to discredit everything. He argued that Derek's stability was only because of my financial support, which wasn't sustainable, and that the boys needed their mother and had been thriving in Amanda's care. Then Caroline called Amanda to the stand. She asked Amanda if she had testified that she transferred funds from the business account to her father's account as a business loan. Amanda confirmed this was correct. Caroline asked where the loan agreement was. Amanda said it was a verbal agreement. Caroline questioned whether this was a verbal agreement for $150,000, and Amanda said yes, explaining that her father was helping them during a difficult time. Caroline asked why it was difficult, noting that according to bank records, the business was profitable with strong revenue. Amanda hesitated and said Derek was spending recklessly. When Caroline asked on what, Amanda said she didn't know because Derek handled expenses. Caroline pulled out bank statements showing that Derek's personal spending was consistent and modest, covering rent, groceries, utilities, and transportation. Meanwhile, Amanda's personal credit card statements showed charges at high-end restaurants, boutiques, and spa services totaling over $30,000 in 6 months. Caroline asked if Amanda would call that reckless spending. Amanda replied that she deserved to enjoy the success of the business. Caroline asked if it was Amanda's business or a joint venture with her husband funded by his father's investment. Amanda said it was joint. Caroline then asked why Amanda transferred the funds without Derek's knowledge or consent. Amanda claimed he knew. Caroline pulled out phone records showing no calls or texts to Derek on the day of the transfer and no discussion. The transfer happened at 9 in the morning while Derek was at a client meeting across town. Caroline asked how he could have known. Amanda's face flushed and she said she didn't remember the exact details. Caroline remarked that this was convenient. Caroline moved on to discuss the mental health accusations. She noted that Amanda claimed Derek sent threatening text messages and asked where these messages were. Amanda said she deleted them because she was afraid. Caroline questioned why Amanda would delete the evidence if she was afraid, but kept screenshots to show her lawyer. Amanda said yes. Caroline explained that the screenshots Amanda provided had been analyzed by a digital forensics expert who found signs of manipulation. Timestamps didn't align with phone records, and message threads were incomplete. In fact, the metadata showed these images were created on a computer, not captured from a phone. Caroline asked Amanda to explain that. Bradley Harding objected, but the judge overruled. Amanda stammered that she didn't know and suggested maybe her phone was acting up. Caroline suggested that maybe these messages were fabricated. The courtroom fell silent. Caroline continued, noting that Amanda also claimed Derek was mentally unstable, yet Dr. Nina Patel's records showed no signs of instability. In fact, they showed a man proactively managing normal work stress. Caroline asked if Amanda was aware of these records when she made her accusations. Amanda said no. Caroline asked if Amanda had ever encouraged Derek to see a therapist. Amanda said no. Caroline summarized that Amanda claimed Derek was unstable, but never encouraged him to get help, and when he did get help on his own, she used it against him. Amanda didn't answer. Caroline turned to the judge and stated that what we had here was a deliberate, coordinated effort to destroy a father's relationship with his children while stealing his financial resources. She said the evidence was overwhelming. Fraudulent financial transfers, fabricated text messages, false accusations, and manipulated supervised visit reports. She argued that Amanda Caldwell and her family had weaponized the family court system for financial gain. Bradley Harding stood and told the judge that his client made mistakes, but her primary concern had always been the welfare of her children. Caroline shot back, asking if Amanda's primary concern was the children. Why did she allow them to believe their father abandoned them? Why did she restrict his contact? Why did she create an environment where those boys thought their dad didn't want them? She pointed out that the audio recordings showed children who loved their father and were happy to see him. This wasn't the behavior of children who had been protected from an unstable parent, but rather the behavior of children who had been lied to. Justice Holloway looked at Amanda and said she had reviewed all the evidence. The forensic accounting, the digital analysis, the witness testimony, and the audio recordings. She found it deeply troubling that Amanda had made serious accusations against her ex-husband without credible evidence. She found it even more troubling that funds were transferred out of a jointly owned business without proper documentation or consent. The judge turned to Derek and said she had also reviewed Dr. Patel's records and his current living situation. He had stable employment, stable housing, and his sons were clearly thriving in his care. She saw no evidence of the instability claimed by his ex-wife. Justice Holloway announced she was ordering an immediate modification of custody. Joint legal custody would be shared equally between both parents, and physical custody would be split 50-50, with both parents having equal parenting time. Supervised visitation was terminated, and Derek would have unsupervised access to his children effective immediately. Amanda gasped, and her mother stood up, calling the decision outrageous. The judge told Mrs. Caldwell to sit down because she wasn't finished. She was also ordering that Amanda Caldwell repay the sum of $280,000 to Derek Reeves, representing funds improperly transferred from the business account. If repayment was not made within 90 days, she would authorize seizure of assets. Furthermore, she was referring this case to the Crown Attorney's Office for potential criminal prosecution, because this court did not take kindly to fraud. She struck the gavel and adjourned the court. Derek's knees buckled, and I caught him. He was crying, but these were tears of relief. Outside the courtroom, Leo and Jasper ran to him. They had been in a waiting room with a social worker. Derek dropped to his knees and hugged them both, holding them like he would never let go. Leo asked if they were going home, and Derek said yes, they were going home. 3 months later, Amanda's father, Vincent, was charged with fraud and tax evasion. Amanda herself faced charges of embezzlement. Her lawyer negotiated a plea deal where she would repay the money and avoid jail time in exchange for a guilty plea on lesser charges. The money came back, most of it anyway. Legal fees had eaten a chunk, but Derek had enough to restart. He launched a new business, this time with ironclad contracts and a lawyer reviewing everything. Leo and Jasper split time between both parents, but Derek had them more often than not. Amanda had visibly checked out, more interested in salvaging her own life than being a mother. I stayed in Toronto and rented a condo near Derek's place. I see my grandsons 3 times a week. We go to the park, I help with homework, and I'm teaching them to play chess. One evening, about a year after that day in the parking lot, Derek and I were sitting on my balcony while the boys played inside. He looked at me and said he never thanked me properly. I told him he didn't need to thank me. He insisted, saying that if I hadn't shown up that day and helped him fight, he would still be living in his car, or worse, he would have lost his boys forever. I told him he was my son, and that's what fathers do. He was quiet for a moment, then said he thought he had lost everything: his wife, his home, his business, and his kids. He thought he was the problem, and that maybe he really was unstable, and everyone else could see it except him. I told him he was never the problem, and that they wanted him to think that because that's how abusers work. They make you doubt yourself. Derek said he knew that now, but for months he believed it. The court believed it, and everyone believed it except me. I told him I know my son because I've known him since the day he was born. I know who he is, and he's not what they tried to make him out to be. He nodded, and we sat in silence, watching the sunset over Toronto. After a while, Derek said my name and thanked me. I reached over and squeezed his shoulder, telling him he would have done the same for his boys. He smiled and said he would because he learned it from me. Inside, Leo called out, asking me to come play Jenga with them. I stood up and said duty calls. Derek laughed and said he would order pizza. I walked inside to where my grandsons were building a precarious tower of wooden blocks. Jasper looked up at me and grinned, telling me not to let it fall. I sat down carefully and told him I wouldn't let it fall. And I meant it, not just the tower and not just that moment, but all of it. This family, these boys, my son. I would protect them no matter what, because that's what family does. We don't let each other fall.